Hi friends, welcome back to Author Notes. I'm Tanya E Williams. There's something about April that feels like a threshold. The light changes, the air softens, we begin stepping out of one season and into another. And this month's historical fiction releases feel very much like that. These are stories about women standing at turning points in history. In the middle of war, on the brink of reinvention, under the weight of fame, inside systems that were never built for them. So let's step into April together. Let's begin where April begins. The first two novels release on April 7th. The Last Woman of Warsaw by Judy Battalion. This story takes us to 1938 Warsaw. Tension is rising. Anti-Semitic laws are tightening, and at the center of it all are two very different young women. Fanny, an ambitious artist desperate to be taken seriously, and Zozia, a committed activist shaped by violence and ideology. When their beloved photography professor disappears, these two women are forced into an uneasy alliance. What draws me to this story is the intersection of art and danger. It asks, what happens to creativity when the world begins closing in? What happens to intellectual women when ideology starts policing every space? This feels like a novel about courage that begins quietly, in classrooms, studios, conversations, before history forces it into something much larger. If you love pre-World War II settings and stories of women navigating the tightening grip of political change, this one may speak to you. Also releasing April 7th is Love and Other Monsters by Emily Franklin. This novel transports us to the stormy summer of 1816, the year without a summer, when Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, and others gathered at Lake Geneva. But this story isn't told from Mary's perspective. It's told through the eyes of Claire Clairmont, Mary's stepsister, a woman who history largely erased. We know the legend. We know Frankenstein. We know the scandal. But what about the young woman at the center of it all? The one who loved fiercely, documented everything, and yet somehow disappeared from the narrative? This novel explores celebrity culture before we had a name for it. It explores artistic ambition, complicated sisterhood, and the unsettling question of who controls the story. If you're drawn to literary historical fiction, especially stories that reclaim overlooked women, this one feels especially bold. Liddy, The Further Travels and Adventures of Liddy Newton by Jane Smiley, is set in 1857 as America edges towards civil war. This novel follows Liddy, newly widowed after her abolitionist husband is murdered. Instead of retreating, she arms herself, literally, with a pistol, and accompanies her spirited niece across the Atlantic. What unfolds is part survival story, part reinvention, part exploration of performance and identity. I'm always drawn to stories about women in motion, women who are not static inside their grief, but moving towards something uncertain. This one feels expansive and sweeping. Two women crossing borders, geographic and emotional, in search of new roles in a divided world. If you enjoy panoramic historical fiction with headstrong heroines, this may be one to watch. Also releasing April 21st, The Mountains We Call Home by Kim Michelle Richardson. Readers who loved The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek will recognize Cussie Lovett here. This companion novel returns us to Kentucky and explores incarceration, poverty, fractured families, and once again, the transformative power of books. What resonates with me about this premise is the idea of literacy as resistance, reading as dignity, stories as survival. If you're someone who believes deeply in the quiet, steady magic of books and the way they anchor us in difficult seasons, this novel feels especially personal. And also on April 21st, A Woman's Place by Danielle Steele. We begin aboard the Titanic in 1912. A young aristocratic woman survives while her father does not. A promise is made, a marriage follows. But the heart of this story unfolds in industrial Manchester, where she steps into leadership in a man's world. Stories like this often explore a familiar historical arc: catastrophe, reinvention, and a woman stepping into leadership in spaces that resisted her. For readers who appreciate sweeping, emotionally driven stories of resilience and societal change, this one carries that classic historical arc. April closes with 3 very compelling releases. Mrs. Benedict Arnold by Emma Perry. This novel reframes one of the most infamous names in American history, Benedict Arnold, through the perspective of his wife, Peggy Shippen. Set in Revolutionary-era Philadelphia, we see loyalist balls and patriot salons, political maneuvering, and one of the most famous acts of treason in history. But from her point of view, the question becomes far more intimate. How far will one woman go for safety, for survival, for family? I'm always intrigued by stories that revisit so-called villains and ask us to look again, especially when women's motivations were simplified or dismissed in traditional narratives. If revolutionary history interests you, particularly through a female lens, this one feels interesting. Also releasing April 28th, The Island Club by Nicola Harrison. This story shifts us to 1956 Balboa Island, California. On the surface, it's sun-drenched and idyllic: tennis courts, society events, community life. But beneath the polished exterior, 3 women are facing unraveling marriages, financial risk, and long-buried secrets. What I appreciate about this premise is the exploration of female friendship as survival. Mid-century settings often present a pristine facade, but we know there are cracks underneath. If you're drawn to mid-century historical fiction that examines marriage, social performance, and female friendship under pressure, this one appears especially layered. And finally, The Original by Priya Parmar. This novel explores the early career of Katharine Hepburn in 1930s Hollywood. After personal tragedy, she makes 2 decisions. She will become famous, and she will never let anyone hurt her again. What unfolds is a story about ambition, sexuality, the studio system, and the cost of authenticity in a world that demands conformity. Stories about early Hollywood fascinate me because they sit at the intersection of glamour and control. And when those stories center on women who refuse to soften themselves to fit expectations, they feel especially relevant. If you love biographical historical fiction and bold female protagonists, this one stands out. When I step back and look at April's releases collectively, a clear pattern emerges. Women reclaiming narratives, women navigating systems that underestimated them, women stepping into risk, sometimes willingly, sometimes because history left them little choice. From 1816 Lake Geneva to 1930s Hollywood, from revolutionary Philadelphia to Appalachian Kentucky, these novels remind us that history isn't shaped only by the loudest voices. It's shaped in private decisions, in reinvention, in resilience that often goes unnoticed. I'd love to know which of these is already on your TBR. Are you more drawn to literary scandal and early Hollywood ambition, or to revolutionary intrigue and Appalachian resilience? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy discovering new historical fiction each month, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode of Author Notes. Until next time, happy reading! The story takes us to 1938 Warsaw. Tension is rising, anti-Semitic laws are tightening, and at the center of it are 2 very young. Also releasing April 7th is Love and Other Monsters by Emily Franklin. This novel transports